The movie begins with Matthew grieving. He has just lost his life partner and struggles to leave her body in bed. As time goes on, his days become a blur of routine tasks, and he looks disheveled while doing them. While taking a large number of pills, he hears a knock on the door. It's Madame Dune, his housekeeper. He's surprised because he's lost track of time. She starts tidying up, and he mentions he's heading out for lunch. However, it's Wednesday, not Thursday, when he usually meets Madame Larry for lunch. Matthew goes to his regular spot, where he's been ordering the same meal for 3 years. One of the staff, who knows him well, serves him. Although Matthew has lived in France long enough to learn some of the language, he still struggles with communication. The staff even gossip about him in French, which he doesn't understand. After eating, he sits on a park bench, feeling his late wife's presence and her attempts to teach him French. Matthew visits the shared grave with Joan, who passed away in 2007. Later, he boards a bus and accidentally bumps into a man who becomes aggressive. Pauline intervenes and stands by him. She offers to walk him home, but he hesitates, feeling like a charity case. She insists and walks with him to his apartment. Touched by her kindness, Matthew offers to buy her coffee, but she declines, saying she has to return to work. She's a dance teacher, and Matthew shares that he used to teach philosophy. They communicate easily in English, as Pauline speaks it fluently. Back at his apartment, Matthew calls his son, who was supposed to visit with his family. However, he learns during the brief call that the visit is no longer possible due to his wife's other plans. The next day, Thursday, Matthew meets Madame Larry for their regular lunch at the restaurant. Matthew boards the bus and spots Pauline, who's listening to music and doesn't notice him immediately. They both get off at the same stop. Surprised by his presence, Pauline learns that Matthew got off just to see her. They sit on a bench while waiting for the next bus, introduce themselves, and she invites him to her dance school. Pauline gives Matthew a flyer and mentions she works at the school every day except Thursdays. Later, Matthew arrives at the school, feeling nervous. Madame Larry encourages him to go inside, where he finds Pauline teaching with skill. She notices Matthew and smiles, piquing Madame Larry's curiosity. During class, Pauline guides the students through dances. Matthew keeps his eyes on her, prompting her to signal him to close his eyes. After class, Mary praises Pauline's teaching and her English, which she attributes to her heritage. Madame Larry notes Matthew helps with the language. Back at his apartment, Matthew decides to shave his beard. The next day, he visits Pauline's class and watches from the sidelines. A student pulls him into the class, and he smiles at Pauline, showing he's catching on. They have lunch in a park where Pauline surprises him with hot dogs, hoping to remind him of home. Matthew spills some on his tie but is happy. Pauline comments on his clean-shaven look, and he mentions it reminds her of her late father. They both share that their fathers are no longer alive. Pauline introduces Matthew to Lucien, who criticizes her treatment of students. Pauline defends Matthew, saying he's not a student. Matthew invites Pauline to his apartment, where she admires the space and his extensive book collection. He reveals he plans to sell the books, but has no buyer yet. Matthew surprises Pauline by showing he has a car. They drive to a restaurant where he insists on a table with a better view. They discuss their pasts. Pauline's mother wanted her to be a dancer, and Matthew shares he's been through a lot and feels solitude. Pauline wonders if she's a distraction to him, but he says she's important. After dinner, they go rowing and talk about life's meaning. Matthew's car breaks down on the way back, and Jerome offers to drive Pauline while Matthew waits for a tow truck. Back home, Matthew reflects on his wife's presence and feels at home where she is. At lunch with Madame Larry, Matthew appears distracted. She mentions staying with a cousin who lost a spouse. Matthew thinks about making a change. Matthew writes letters to important people in France, including Madame Dune and Pauline, and takes a concerning dose of pills. The next morning, Madame Dune finds his apartment locked and gets no response. Matthew ends up in the hospital where Pauline is upset. She questions his drastic action and why he didn't talk to her first. He tells her presence made him realize he was wasting time. As she goes to get a Coke, Matthew doesn't want her to leave. Pauline hugs him, and just then, Matthew's son Miles arrives and sees them together. Pauline and Miles talk at a cafe. Pauline clarifies that she's not romantically involved with Matthew, but is just helping him. Miles expresses frustration about his own situation and his wife's affair. Pauline tries to explain that Matthew feels Miles's anger is directed at him. During dinner, Matthew is disappointed to see Miles instead of Pauline. Their conversation is awkward until Pauline arrives. They argue about St. Malo and selling Joan's house, leading to a heated exchange. Matthew admits he didn't want Miles to become like him. Pauline chases Miles to apologize, but he tells her to stop interfering. He orders a cheese sandwich without pickles, just like his father used to. Matthew goes to dance class the next day, but Pauline is absent due to illness. He finds her and apologizes for involving her in the family drama. Pauline feels that both Miles and Matthew think she has too much free time to fix others' lives. Matthew apologizes again and says he sees her as a crack in his life. He says she reminds him of Joan and that he wants her to get the house. Pauline is stunned by the offer since the house means a lot to her. Matthew tells her she has become like family to him. Overwhelmed, Pauline steps outside to smoke. Matthew joins her and tells her that a perfect family doesn't exist, and she needs to stop expecting that from him and his children. Pauline disagrees, believing his children don't hate him. Matthew insists they do because he took their mother away. He explains that while in Paris, Joan was diagnosed with cancer, and her condition worsened quickly. Joan wanted to go home but couldn't, and she asked Matthew not to tell the kids about her illness. Her death shocked them, and Miles struggled the most. After some wine, Matthew falls asleep. Pauline tucks him in and leaves a note before returning to his apartment, where she finds Miles demanding to know where his father is. His harsh tone makes him apologize, and he invites Pauline back in. Miles vents about how his father pushed him away during their mother's death, and now, as he seems to be trying to join her, Pauline speaks candidly with him. When Matthew wakes, he reads Pauline's note, which has helped Miles understand the truth better. Miles is now less hostile and shows Pauline a photo of his mother with his son Kyle. Pauline is surprised that Miles carries a physical photo rather than a digital one. Miles comments that she is easily impressed. Matthew writes a note and takes a taxi to Paris, France, not one of the U.S. Parises. Pauline wakes up, hurriedly leaves, and shares a passionate kiss with Miles. When Matthew arrives and finds Pauline gone, he rings the doorbell. Miles answers, and Matthew tells him he mustn't hurt Pauline. During lunch, Matthew becomes angry, accusing Miles of lying to Pauline and cheating on his wife, Susan. Miles clarifies that Susan has filed for divorce, not that he's unfaithful. They argue heatedly, with Matthew admitting he didn't want Miles to become like him. Pauline returns to St. Malo, but Matthew has already left. Miles informs her that he now understands the truth about his mother's passing, thanks to Pauline. He regrets not saying goodbye and sees his mom and Pauline together. Matthew advises him to do everything right to keep her. Miles gets ready to leave, but does so with a positive attitude. He hugs his father and tells him he's not as alone as he thinks. Matthew asks Miles to tell Pauline that he has come to terms with things and that she'll understand. Matthew writes a note and leaves it in the master bedroom he shared with Joan. He removes Joan's picture from the nightstand and takes it to another room, closing the door behind him. Later, Pauline goes to the park and sits on a bench. She tells Matthew she misses him and feels his presence with her. Miles arrives and informs her that Matthew has left the house in St. Malo to her. Pauline says she didn't want the house, but it's already been decided. Miles needs to visit his son, but promises he'll return for her. Pauline shrugs and walks with him as he gestures for her to join him.
Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell icon, and stay connected with us.